I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for stopping by. At the Bold Business Podcast, we are normalizing important conversations. Yes, there are tips. Yes, there are ways to solve problems. More importantly, are going to be, what do you need for yourself to be able to solve those problems and make the most of the education, the training, and the programs that you are already using. This is a supplement to that. It can sit on top of it, fuel your soul, fuel your mind, and most importantly, regardless of where you're at on your journey. Maybe you're starting out. Maybe you're ready to scale. Maybe you're going through reinvention. The conversations we are having will help you at each of those stages. So hang around, see what's going on, and I look forward to seeing you engaging with our videos.
If you know you're a worrier, if you know you're an overthinker, if you know that that's going to happen to you, then make a plan to deal with it. And then stop and allow yourself to refocus on what's next.
The ideal description of the person you want to get feedback from is they know enough to be knowledgeable, but not too much to be an expert, because they're going to see things that the expert is blind to and the novice can't pick up on.
And I love this new phrase. It's going to show up everywhere. Success leaves clues. And this is one of the things that I really liked about our conversation today.
Welcome to It's Your Business, brought to you by the Bold Business Podcast. This is your go-to source for navigating today's ever-evolving business landscape. In this program, Jess, Christy, and Quentin share the realities of current business challenges and triumphs. Get ready to lead with depth, understanding, and achievement.
This is the It's Your Business program, and I want to say thanks for being here. Thanks for stopping by on YouTube. Thanks for stopping by on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining Christy and Quentin. We are all here, and we are talking about navigating the ever-changing, ever-evolving business landscape. And I'm your host, Jess Dewell, and we're getting real. We're getting real here about current business challenges and our triumphs. And how do we get more of those? Because I recently learned that I love this new phrase. It's going to show up everywhere. Success leaves clues. And this is one of the things that I really liked about our conversation today. So get ready, lean in, let's lead with depth, understanding, and achievement. Christy, tell us who you are.
Christy Maxfield, Purpose First Advisors. We are strategic growth advisors who also help owners plan their exit and succession plans.
Quentin, tell us who you are.
Quentin Ortega, president of QCO Consulting, growth, strategic, exit planning, and negotiation consulting.
And I'm Jess Dewell at Red Direction, and we're doing strategic growth work to break through those business plateaus to get you where you want to go next based off of the success you've already had. So we're talking about the upside of downside thinking. It's interesting how this came up. I know we have these conversations every once in a while, and of course we decided to put it into a conversation that we could invite others to join in with us to have and to work with, because we're in a world of positivity. We're in a world where we only want to share things that are working. We are in a world where we want people to just see this certain thing. And it's great to live there. And at the same point in time, there's a lot to go with that, isn't there, Christy and Q?
Things is embracing reality and not being afraid of it. And to echo what Q said before, we're trained as business owners to project a level of confidence, right? It's part of what inspires people to work with us as employees. It's part of what inspires investors to get on board. It's part of what inspires customers to keep coming back. And so and we can also become vulnerable to our own hype, so to speak. And it's really important sometimes to take off those rose-colored or purple, whatever works for you, colored glasses, and take a hard look at the things that you don't talk about in public. Like, we'll talk about revenue in public, but we don't necessarily talk about profitability. We'll talk about increased sales, but we won't talk about increased expenses that went along with it, right? We'll talk about high-performing teams, but we also have that person who isn't working out and who saying goodbye to is a lot harder than we thought it was. So whether you can come to terms with that reality yourself or you need an outside consultant, advisor to help you do, that's one of the things I think coaches, advisors, consultants do extraordinarily well when they're good at it, is to say, let me share with you what I'm observing, and let me share with you what you're sharing with me, and let's see if those things actually line up. And do it in a way with love and compassion so that we can have a difficult conversation, but ultimately we can face reality.
Christy, I was just thinking as you were saying that about how I often call that role like an executive thought partner, right? So with some of my clients that I have that with, and I think all three of us fill this role for various people, but having someone, whether it's a consultant or a good friend or a spouse or just a trusted compatriot, right, who you can talk to, who really understands what's going on in your venture, but who is not tied to it, should it start to sink, right? Because I think everybody is tied to their venture. And you need that person who is, I care about this, but I can also tell you the reality, right? Because I'm not as in it, can't see the forest for the trees, to reference the old adage. Having someone that's near enough to know what's going on, but far enough that they can be real with you is, I think, invaluable for business owners, entrepreneurs.
Adam Grant in his book Originals talked about how that's the ideal description of the person you want to get feedback from, is they know enough to be knowledgeable, but not too much to be an expert, because they're going to see things that the expert is blind to and the novice can't pick up on. So I think starting with, we're talking about the upside of downside planning. I'm not here to suggest that all reality is bad, but starting with reality gives us a really good scenario to start with in terms of what could happen in the future. And when we were talking earlier about, is there a difference between downside planning and scenario planning? I think downside planning is very specific about what's the downside to doing X, Y, or Z, whether that's launching a new product, bringing on more staff, going out for a round of fundraising. What's the downside if we do this? Scenario planning, just in general as a topic, concludes that, but also includes all the other things that could happen. What if we do this and we increase revenue by 10%? What happens then, right? And actually plotting out the decisions you're thinking you're going to make, and what do we think the consequences of those decisions would be, good or bad. So again, starting with reality allows you to then run those scenarios in a way that makes the most sense. We're not starting from a false positive or a false starting point. We're grounded.
There's a skill that I'm listening to here. And yes, there's a discernment piece in there, but there's also can I be detached from this? And that which is separate from, can I have no judgment? Because those are two different places, and I'm learning the difference between this. This is a place I've been playing personally in my journaling and in my personal development, but also then bringing that into when we're working in strategy sessions and when I'm doing my present retreats and when we're solving problems as a team, whatever that is. Where are we getting in our own way because we think something is negative? So I'm going to add to this. The reality could be there's neutral here. And if we can start and state whatever it is with neutrality, then we can go, so do we like that? Do we not like that? Is that positive or is that negative? And I know that, and I'm just going to pick neutral in the middle because it's easy to visualize and it's easy to go, okay, I know what neutral feels, sounds, looks like. And that allows for a place of the same question to be heard differently to explore.
And the reality too is that most of the time, the result will be in that neutral space, right? I have an example that just popped in my head of a friend of mine who's launching an investment fund right now, right? So he's gathered funds from other investors. He's about to place his decisions into the marketplace. And I was talking to him the other day about how is he attracting more investors? What does that look like? And then we went through just in conversation, what is the worst case scenario, right? If you make the wrong decisions, how much money does your investor pool lose? And then also, what if it goes really well? And then if you make them 10x what they thought that you would, what is the plan? And we went through that exercise, not necessarily not because those investors are asking about that. They obviously believe in him already. They trust that this is going to work, but really because depending on which one of those happens, there's a different operational strategy that he needs to have ready. Meaning it translates to, if it's going poorly, how do I rebound? If it's going really well, how do I use that positive experience, that positive track record to start leveraging, finding more investors, starting a second fund? What is that path? And spending time pre-thinking about that pathway, because you don't want to be surprised at the end of the day.
Most folks resist the idea of planning in a formal sense because they have the disposition that plans will always change, so why bother planning, right? But if it's not necessarily about following a plan as much as it is about familiarizing yourself with the various plans you might need to employ depending on what happens when your product meets a customer, when your staffing plan actually starts to roll out, when you decide to go into a new market. If I can think through the iterations of what that might look like, I have this ability then to pull different thoughts and actions much faster because I have done some of that work. So in previous conversations, we've talked about the difference between learning in the way we've all been taught in school versus just-in-time learning. And I would put this still in the just-in-time category because we're usually talking about relatively short time frames. Yes, I can try to imagine what 10 years out will be, and that has its use in my planning process. I can think about 5. I can think about 3. But really, I'm doing all of that to think about what has to happen right now. If that's where I want to be, what has to happen in real time right now to increase the likelihood that's where I'm going to go. So this gives me more strength and resilience. And Q likes to say it's never as bad as you think. Whatever scenario you can come up with is probably far worse than what reality is going to throw at you.
And the example that we brought up, Christy, when we were talking the other day is the zombie preparation kind of example.
So before you do that, I'm going to actually make this the answer to Anne's question. What do you think about that? This is good. Anne, you asked a question in our conversations before the live stream, so we're going to pop it up here. Anne's interested to learn how you handle worst case scenario thinking without going into catastrophizing or being catastrophe mind.
Going over the ledge.
Yeah, going right over the ledge. And okay, take us there, Q.
One of the things that I always tell people to do is to plan to worry, right? So if you're a worrier, if you're an overthinker, if you know that's going to happen to you, then make a plan to deal with it. And so a lot of times I suggest clients like set a timer, 10, 15 minutes and use those minutes to just let yourself run as deep and fast and off the cliff as you can with what might go wrong. Because a lot of times just getting it out is super helpful. And I would also say in that time frame, write it all down. Just everything you can put on paper, typing if you prefer, but my method is handwriting. And I would say just getting it out of your head is super helpful, right? I've had this note actually behind me right here, which you can't read. It has been on my boards since college, so well over a decade at this point. And it says dread then do, right? Which there is an author that I should attribute that to. I don't remember which one it is, but that's the idea, right? Just spend the time getting that worry out of the way and then stop and allow yourself to refocus on what's next.
As you were speaking, Q, one of the things that was coming up for me was it's interesting to consider the work that we do now, all it does is help us in the future. So some of us out there are going to be like my sister, and I'm using her as an example completely lovingly. She knows if this is supposed to happen, she's got a plan, and it might have the number of steps to M, A to M. But somewhere along the way, like right around G, there's a turn. Guess what? She's already thought about steps A through whatever for the deviation at step G from the original path. And there's these things, and she has thought through all of these, and she sets it up so that I am executing what I've already thought through because she's leaning into, I know how to do, I can show up. I thought about this when I was rational and logical, and I'm not now, so here we go. And I think that's an interesting concept, right? And one way to do it, I do not do that. I fly by the seat of my pants. I'm making decisions from my gut all day long and all week long. Now, yes, I have help. Yes, I do the work to have a cadence. Yes, we focus energy for Jessica in specific areas and for Red Direction specifically on purpose because of that tendency to fly by the seat of the pants. But if I didn't stop to think about what could happen, if I didn't stop to think about what are the resources I have now, what are the tools that are available to me right now? So when I am making these decisions and crazy stuff happens, that's neutrally looked at first to decide, do we like it, do we not? Is this positive? Is this negative? Even if I don't like it and it's positive, maybe it's a good thing. We can ask questions about that. And so that's what I would add to this part of the conversation is there's other ways too. So just own the way that you work and everything we're talking about today, adapt it from the way that you work to know the purpose of this is to put energy into it, have had some shape about it, because as we're going to talk about later, there is value in just having the thought.
While you were saying that, Jess, I realized that there's actually a theme to these monthly events that we've been having, which is really just like knowing yourself and how you work is what helps you master how to do all these things that we talk about.
Based on how you operate and how you work.
When everybody's got their own way.
Is actually taking action. So I don't know your sister. I'm sure she's lovely. But if she only thought for A to M and she never did A or B or C.
Oh, she's doing those. She's not one of those who did the thinking and skipped ahead or quit altogether. But yeah,
caught in that overthinking, I would say that's problematic because we actually can't test any of the ideas that you're having. So if having the thought is valuable, that acting on the thought is also valuable so that you can learn something, you can get some kind of feedback. Oh, the oven's hot. I'm not going to touch that again. It's humid outside. I'm going to dress more appropriately. Whatever the case may be, you're getting feedback, right? So you don't wear corduroy in August in St. Louis because that just sounds awful. Shield beforehand, Winston, besides that, there's different ways you can plan for the worst in order to be more prepared for gradients of bad. and we're going to bring up a silly example, but truly think about it. In your business, the worst case scenarios are you close, you cease operations. Perhaps as a part of that, you have to declare bankruptcy. Perhaps as a part of that, you have to pay back loans. You owe debt. I don't want any of those things. All of those things sound horrible to me. But death is not on the list of things that will happen if my business doesn't go well. And I know she's going to talk more about this too, but because I've also done some risk mitigation, being homeless, going hungry, not having my loved ones around me is also an extreme outlier as an outcome to my business. Might I have to go get a job and do something I don't really love? Yep, that might happen. That's a distinct possibility. But the odds of my entire world falling apart, me and my loved ones dying, and it being something I can't recover from, because I've thought through what could happen, because I've taken risk mitigation strategies, because I've done other things to create a safety net, means that I've probably negated the absolute worst things that could happen. Now it's just, what are the really bad, crappy things that could happen? Which is like zombies, surprisingly enough.
We were talking about that zombie example, right? So there was a big push from the national safety agencies here in the US to tell people to prepare for zombies. They even put out commercials that were zombie related and stuff. And really that was because obviously we hope that they're not actually preparing us for zombies. But if you're prepared for zombies, you've done the steps necessary to be prepared for other natural disasters and emergencies. And I think that's what we're saying here today too, right? Is prepare for the worst. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but at the end of the day, being prepared will make you better, more equipped, and quicker should you need to be.
I was going to say a key piece of this is that just means we need information. We need to know ourselves, right? That's what we've been talking about, but we also need information. And I know that's big on your heart and mind too, Q.
Earlier I mentioned when Christy was talking about this kind of range of what's the best way it could go, what's the worst way it could go. And I spent a lot of time actually talking through with people like kind of that range. And part of that comes from my experience as a professional negotiator. We talk about a term that we use there that I like to spread and try to get in as many people's heads as possible is BATNA, B-A-T-N-A, which is best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And what that really is that's saying, hey, when you're going into a negotiation, what's the kind of, if we don't work this out, where do we land? Like the example I'll use because it's easy, right? If you're going to buy a car and you can only pay $5,000 and the lowest the dealership is going to get to is $10,000. Okay, we're never gonna meet. So if we don't meet, what happens, right? And that's your downside planning, right? It's Do you have a car that's still okay? Or do you need a car right now? Can you use Lyft for a while until you find a different car that fits your budget? What are these alternatives? And the other thing about going into any negotiation is, generally speaking, most people would agree that the person who has the most information, that is the most equipped, is going to have the highest likelihood of winning the negotiation. And so I think that this is really about information gathering, like you said, Jess, and arming yourself with what is the worst possible scenario, what is the best possible scenario, and then talking through everything in between. And Christy, to your example, I regularly, when I encounter, owners who are worried about, they're stressed about a decision or a thing that's going to happen, I usually start at, will you be homeless? And because the possibility is there, but like a lot of times too, just setting that extreme kind of anchor point for them makes them realize, oh, actually, we're going to be fine. This change or this thing that happens or this concern or this new deal it's not going to make or break us, but it is going to have impacts. And by setting that extreme anchor, then we're able to work back towards where the real floor is, finding that real floor based on where that extreme one is set.
I'm going to be, just so you know, there's so much data we have at our fingertips. We've got numbers. Do we look at them? We've got, to Christy's point at the very beginning, we've got profitability. Are we choosing to look at it? We've got expenses. Are we actually watching them closely? We've got resources of the people that we are choosing, whether it's vendors or employees or partners, and how are we working with those relationships? What is the capacity? Do we have overlap? Do we need it? We have all of this data already. And so when somebody says, know your numbers, what that means to me is I want to know by product how profitable you are. I want to know your top line profitability. I want to know your top 5 expenses and why they're important to have as your top 5 expenses. And there's some others too, but I'm just thinking off of my head, what do we need? Because here's the scoop. A lot of people out there in the world, if you just go Google, how do I solve this problem? They're going to be like, cut people, cut expenses, cut whatever. And you know what? You got to know your numbers to know if that's a good idea, because sometimes it is. A lot of the time there's another way. And if we're worst case scenario planning, when I think about business and I think about the need to contract, one of those things is people feel like they're like, let's just start closing things down. Let's drop products. Let's stop relationships. Let's save money. But we don't understand why we've done the things, or we forget to look at that. And that's a really big part of where we've gotten to. Good, we're in a growing pain. Or maybe we do have to contract because we're not growing the way we expected to. We can actually pause then and go, cool, so what questions do I need to ask? What information do I actually really have?
I thought of a few things while you're all talking, but when Q mentioned the car example, the solutions, the alternative between getting a car or not getting a car focuses on the solution. I need a car. But it reorients it if you think about, how am I going to solve my transportation issue? If the solution you've come to isn't tenable, I want a car. That probably is the best way to actually solve that problem if you live most places in the United States. But there's other ways. So can you shift your thinking to, what am I trying to solve for versus why am I choosing this solution? Why is this the dichotomy I've put myself in? So I took that out of it. It opens up your thinking a lot more about how you could potentially solve for what you're trying to solve for. The other thing is, okay, maybe your business failing means you are going to declare bankruptcy and lose your home. That happens to people. It happens every day. That, if we can acknowledge that's a reality and that you've made choices that make that possible, then what other choices can we make now to reduce the likelihood? Like, literally, okay, call mom and dad, call aunt and uncle, call best friend, call agencies in your community. If this happens to me, what's available to me? Because you might not be able to undo it. You might not be able to avoid that, but you can start to line up resources so that if the worst case scenario does come to be, you're not trying to figure it out in the moment. It's the thing that came into my head is it's like planning your funeral, right? Because you don't want your loved ones to have to make these really hard decisions when there's lots of emotion. And so at the same time, you don't want to be making these decisions while you're shutting down your operation, firing people, canceling contracts, losing your home, you don't want to be like, I wonder where I'm going to sleep tonight. I'd like to have a couple plans in place if that's going to be. And then to your point, Jess, if I'm looking at all the numbers too, the fastest way to cash might be to reduce redundancy, but it might also compromise me if any one of my other scenarios plays out, because we've seen what an entire economy suffers when the emphasis is on just in time and there is no backup and there is no redundancy. So where does redundancy and contingency fit in your planning as a way to deal with those possible scenarios, right? And the upside and downside planning is you may identify a bunch of resources that can help you deal either with current reality or possible reality. You can also make decisions that make you less vulnerable. If I eliminate this redundancy, it does one good thing for me, but it potentially does 4 bad things for me.
Okay, now I'm going to flip that to a quick positive of the reframe. Usually our vendors all are offering similar services. So sometimes choosing the vendor that has the most impact for us in one way and can overlap and take care of another service is actually a great way to go, because we reduce the premium, if you will, because we're not actually using the whole thing. So how are we using our relationships? There's a big piece of that too. What all do you offer? Am I maximizing the money that I'm spending with you? Am I maximizing the investment that I have made with you? I think we do that internally with our personal development of people, with our reviews of people. We do that in our quarterly planning and our annual strategic planning, right? So why not do it with our vendors too?
Was just doing this. So with a company that I work for, their payroll company, I basically said, what else does this company do that they're working on establishing some other processes? And turns out payroll company has this whole suite of stuff that they're like, oh yeah, we just have to turn it on, right? Like you just have to ask us to turn it on, and being sure that you're leveraging, being sure you fully understand what all of your vendors, what all of your partners have going on, because sometimes they're too busy to tell you, even if they should be telling you, right? Even if they should be selling you on all these other things that they could do for you, you might have to go ask them, right? And look for those resources. I think that one thing that came to mind with what you guys were just saying too, as a good reminder about this topic, is really remembering that like the same way it's always done is not necessarily the solution this time. Doing it the way we've always done it is sometimes why you need to do this planning, right? Because it is. And so, Christy, I thought of it when you said the car example again, and you said, really what you need is transportation. So be sure that as you start the process of downside planning, that you're actually planning for the real problem, right? Because the problem in that example is not, I need a car. The problem is I need transportation, and there might be other alternatives that you're overlooking if you're just thinking I need a car. So I think that idea of this is the way we've always done it oftentimes gets in the way of people during this process.
We work with a lot of owners too who have inherited the business or who bought into the business. They're not the founders. They haven't set the tone and tenor. And a lot of times those other relationships get pushed down because there's more urgent things to do. But I think of a client of mine who the person her parent used to do business with in different spaces, whether that's insurance or supplies or things, those folks just aren't there anymore. And so the incentive to stay there might have been diminished. The upside of staying there might have been diminished. And simply not having the relationship might put her at risk versus taking the time out to develop that relationship. We're often told the one way to deal with a downturn in the market is to have a relationship with your banker in case you need money, right? Very few of us are like, oh, it's a sunny Tuesday, everything feels stable, and I'm going to call my banker and schedule lunch. But you don't want to call when it's Friday and it's raining and the business is flooding, so to speak, because that call may not get answered as quickly as the person who did have lunch on a Tuesday.
I'll give a real example. What I'm actually going through and evaluating a very big process we've had for a very long time. And it changes, but it doesn't change. And so to the point, as soon as you said the way we've always done things, I'm like, oh, I talk about this too. And I'm so glad I'm thinking about this. So here, let me just tell you right now, I am actually in the process of evaluating a very big thing that we do and the way that we do it. And I will tell you, I the conversation, I have gone out and I'm having separate conversations and I'm asking, the goal of the conversations is, did I accidentally create something? Did we decide to do something that is irreplaceable? Or is what we're actually doing something we made that's actually what everybody else is already doing? And can I just tell you, I was very scared about this. I was very scared about this because I am doing some contingency planning. I am making sure that if one piece were to fall out, this affects everything. And turns out, my first of 3 calls, I'm super excited to report back. Why, no, I do have a reality sanity check. The things I'm doing make sense and they're not that far out of the norm. So first off,
Always a relief when I call. Yeah.
and I know one of the things that has come up is, are we avoiding it or are we actually purposefully doing this? I actually think I was looking at this and going, okay, I understand this is going to be a problem. But then there were a couple of things that started to happen that made me like really scrunch up my face and that, well, what would I actually do? What if this actually happens? And then it was, oh, I haven't thought about this enough. I didn't reframe the problem and make sure I was solving the right problem. I was going, yeah, everything is okay right now, so I can put this off. And I really still can, but let me tell you, one close call was all it took.
And you bring up a great point. The spoiler alert is the thing that's usually the hardest to replace in our business is us. We're also the most likely bottleneck.
I'm the bottleneck, but I am not the problem, or I am not the thing that would break in this one. No, put me in someplace else, I'll be both.
To think about it, so you have 3 people who get together roughly once a month to talk about what we do and how we do it and what we think about the things we do. And all of us focus on growth, strategic growth with purpose and intention around profitability and sustainability, first and foremost. None of us separate out succession planning or exit planning from the growth discussion because we know that they're intertwined, right? So even though the owners aren't coming to us and saying, usually, I'm ready to go, help me go, and I've got 3 to 5 years, and I'm fully prepared for the emotional roller coaster that's going to be. We have the opportunity in our growth conversations to say, have you thought about what would happen if you were unable to process payroll? Because you're the only one who's done it in 30 years.
Q, I'm still stuck on the, wait, you had a call like that?
I was like, I think that you hit an inside industry joke for Jess and I just then, because we were like a call like that ever shows up.
I would like to sign up for an emotional roller coaster that lasts many years. It's unpredictable.
I'm so ready.
I'm in your line. How long is my wait?
Anyway, if anyone out there feels that way right now, please call any of us, all of us, immediately, because obviously you're our ideal client.
We're actually really down for many years of frustration and uncertainty.
Huh? Oh, yeah. How many people will say that to you in life?
But we're also always looking at growth through the lens of what's the upside of this? What's the downside of this? Particularly if this person ever does want to sell. And whether you say you're never going to retire or not, we hope to God you will, right? That is your advisor's secret wish for you, is that you don't work every day for the rest of your life, even if it is the thing that makes your heart beat faster. We hope that there are a few other things that make your heart beat faster, and that there will come a time where they get more of you rather than.
Which is why we're talking about this right now. And this is important right now.
If you can think of the upside of you retire, the upside of you step aside so somebody else can take the helm, the upside of doing a transition, both not only of wealth, but of leadership, values, and continuity. If you just look at the upside of making sure your business can sustain your employees who you care deeply about and continue to provide a valuable service to your customers and be an integral part of your community, like there's lots of upsides to planning something that feels innately uncomfortable. There was in my feed this morning, Harvard Business Review was like, why you're avoiding retirement? And I'm like, it's the same reason. And the 3 things: you don't know who you're going to be without the business. You don't know who you're going to be in relationship without the business. and you're afraid you're going to lose a sense of purpose, right? None of those have to do with EBITDA, profitability, staffing plans, business growth trajectory. But they are the things keeping you from thinking about those things in ways that eliminate you as the downside.
Ooh, and that's why we're talking about this right now. You're listening to the Bold Business Podcast, where we're talking about and having conversations about the reality of things in a neutral way so that you can laugh with us when we laugh, so you can cringe with us even if we're not cringing. It's okay. That's what this is about. We're having the conversation and we're making it hopefully more normal for you, because really the downside thinking is something that we do avoid. It's hard. It's easy to say, well, everything is good right now. It's easy to say, I'm not ready to think about that. Yet when we have this plan, is what we've been talking about. It's never as bad as it thinks. I'm your host, Jess Dewell, and we're getting down to business on the Bold Business Podcast. This is where we're tackling the challenges that matter most to you with actionable and achievable advice to get real results that lead to your success. Don't forget, press that bell icon so you never miss a program. And it's time to subscribe as well.
Focused on growth? Listen to more programs like this which support the challenges and opportunities you are working with right now. Come on! Search Bold Business Podcast for the key terms at reddirection.com or your preferred podcast listening app.
We've been talking about negotiating the agreement and having all of the information and what that actually looks like. And who's talking to you about this? Why, Christy is talking to you about this. Christy, give us your intro again.
Christy Maxfield with Purpose First Advisors, strategic growth advising, as well as succession and exit planning.
And Quentin
Ortega, founder of QCO Consulting, strategy, growth, operations, negotiation consulting.
And I'm Jess Dewell, the host of the Bold Business Podcast, and I'm glad to have It's Your Business be a part of that. We even found our ideal client, and you heard it here first. Christy said it out loud.
Specializing the emotional side of business ownership, which is actually probably 2/3 of what your growth planning will entail. If you think you're going to scare us, if you think you're going to show us something we've never seen before, I dare you, right? I say to people, show me something I haven't seen before. I want a new story, right? Not because I'm going to go tell tales out of school, but because the more I learn and experience, the more valuable I am to other people, right? I can say, oh, that actually did happen to somebody. Don't do that. We got to face these things. And I think that's the thing you hit on, normalizing the conversation about all the things we don't necessarily want to talk about.
And really what we're talking about here is how do we make it some muscle memory, right? You never forget how to ride a bike. Might be awkward at first, but if you haven't been on a bike in many years, but if you learn to ride a bike, it'll be awkward, but you can do it. And it doesn't matter if nobody's looking at you or you decided to get on a bike with 25 of your closest friends and you're going to go uphill for 10 miles. Whatever it is, you've got muscle memory. And that's actually where I think this part of our conversation can really get tactile and actiony and putting some of this into place, because we talk a lot and we've also given tools across any of the It's Your Businesses. You're going to get ideas and tools to help you start planning right away. And I thought of one that we haven't talked about yet, which is funny because it's my favorite one, to help us with our muscle memory as we're going into this thinking when we're deciding, and I'm going to use the word present retreat because that's what I do, or my strategic intensive. So once a year, I do a strategic intensive and I'm bringing in an outside set of eyes because I will have rose-colored glasses, because I will need my own assumptions challenged. And that is what we are doing for our clients as well. We're doing that in a safe, forward, and real way to make good, quick progress forward. And so I wanted to talk about just go old school, a dynamic SWOT, okay? Your strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. Let me just tell you, when I was thinking about this and preparing last week, it was, of course, our business has one. So if we're going to take all the data we have and we're going to think through the worst case scenario, we better be real about what we're weak at. And I said, know yourself earlier, and I'm going to say it again here. I have a SWOT just for me. I suggest each and every single person have their own SWOT for themselves. And the departments. In general, it doesn't have to be like super granular like some of them have to be, but we have to know where things begin and end. And we have to know what could be in the reality of what we're working with for our muscle memory. Because if I'm going to take all the information I can to negotiation and I know what I want to take away, and I know I want to go, okay, so what is the worst that I can think of that it's never going to be that? Both of those things, when you overlay what you're strong at and what you're weak at internally, that's a great way to solve a lot, because you know what we know? We know what's controllable. How crazy is that? I know they say it in baseball a lot. I'm sure they say it in other sports too. Control the controllables. Oh, they say it in sales also.
And life, right? And the thing you tend to worry about the most is the thing you have absolutely no control over. And if you can really come to terms with the fact that I can't influence that, even my worry will not influence the outcome, what can I control? The good news is it's usually a very small step. There's not a lot of things to choose from. So it limits your choices, and then you make one and you focus on the thing you can control. It goes back to a lot of our mantras, which are doing the basics, doing them consistently, and focusing on the things that matter most.
Not sexy, far from it. However, the most impactful. It's like brushing your teeth every day. Not sexy thing to do, but everybody around you really likes it.
I'll now think of that every time I brush my teeth. Thank you for that.
The gift to humanity.
I'm going to throw back to one of our other episodes, right, where we talked about decisioning, right? And really this planning that we're talking about now is one of the ways to get ready to make better decisions, right? So that when the thing happens, when the event happens, when the deal closes, whatever it is, you have a path made out in front of you. One of the things we talked about there, and that I think carries over here, is knowing yourself about, and also planning for a team around you that thinks with head, heart, and gut, just to use Jess's thing, right? So I think that knowing which of those that you think forward with, Jess was talking about data earlier, right? Making decisions with data. And I was like, great. But you want to also have other people in the room for this planning process that are thinking with their heart, that are thinking with their gut, right? Because if you're missing one of those pieces, then you're not, planning for and or making the best decision possible. So I want to service that again, because I think that for downside planning, if one of the decisions that you are thinking about making is layoffs, heaven forbid, or something like that, I want somebody in that room to be a heart thinker who's like slowing the room down, right? Because I want that balanced feel in that room. And I think that everyone is valuable, right? Because it might make total sense on the data front, but if you lay off all your workers and then you need them again next month, and then they're all mad at you now, you're not going to be, you need people thinking from all the angles. And I think that I love, and I've used many times since Jess brought it up, the head, heart, gut thing. And I think that it applies here very strongly.
And muscle memory is something that happens because you did a thing over and over and over and over and over again, right? So we're saying this kind of planning, if it becomes just part of your normal way of doing business, it gets easier. It's less even obvious to you because you just do it without really thinking about it. Just like you drive to the grocery store. Sometimes you don't know how you got home because you weren't really paying attention to the route, but your muscle memory kicked in and you knew you were turning left and then right and then pulling into your driveway. If we can get that kind of behavior for things that you're doing on a routine basis, then you could also free up more time and energy to deal with the things that aren't going to be familiar. And you can get more familiar with feeling unfamiliar and being okay with ambiguity and staying in that space where it's squishy. Squishy is the best term I have for a lot of things that happen in business. It's not fully baked yet. We don't really know.
Part of the upside of the downside planning is, sure, we're talking about all of the things that could happen. What do we want to do? And Q, you started talking about this, and I'm going to expand on this, is we know we want certain people in the room, but here's the other thing. We've decided this is the way our work is done here. And if this is the way our work is done here, and something goes crazy sideways, and we are in action mode, the good news is part of our muscle memory is this is the way we work here. This is what we've decided is important to start with in any scenario that's high pressure, any scenario that is really unexpected, any scenario that gave us an accidental end of runway that we didn't have yesterday. All of those things we can ensure our culture stays strong, our impact and the way we want to show up in the world stays strong. And that allows us to show up for whatever crisis it is at whatever level in a way that is truly what was it desired and impact what the company wanted to do for impact anyway.
That is all about communication, right? So I want to say too, like, how do you keep the team updated? Because here's the thing also is if your company or venture or group or whatever you are is facing a potential scary thing, right? Scary situation, whether that's a positive scary or negative scary, right? Positive scary being huge contract we're going to struggle to deliver on, right? Like negative scary, huge contract going away that's going to cause us to struggle as a venture, right? Keeping your team up to speed along the way. And when I say your team, I'm going to extend that to mean even like Christy was saying earlier, your bankers, your extended team maybe as well. Keeping them in the loop along the way is going to just really empower you, because if you don't keep them in the loop, they're doing this in their head anyway, right? They're making up a narrative in their head. We all do. And so they're deciding every day, oh, what's the worst that could happen with this potential thing that's coming down the pipe, right? And I think that making sure that you're sharing, you're communicating, you're expressing, here's how we always handle things. This is our culture. This is what we do. And continuing to stay consistent is really valuable during that time too, as you navigate those waters.
And I think like an old-fashioned SWOT, I would also offer an old-fashioned like pestle, looking at all the types of external things that impact your business. Even before this weekend's developments, I had clients who were uncertain about what the election results will mean for their business and the feelings their employees have about the uncertainty around that, and the perceived vulnerability of lines of business or how other people are reacting in the supply chain to the perceived vulnerabilities. And nobody knows what's going to happen. Absolutely no one. But I can run a few ideas of, even if it was status quo in some way, shape, or form, is that good for me? We're assuming that a change is inherently bad. It will be uncomfortable because change is inherently uncomfortable, but it's not inherently bad. So what are my opportunities? What are these external forces that I don't have a lot of control over, if any, but that I have the people power, the brain power, the data power, the heart and the gut power to say, what might this mean for us and how might we move forward? So there's a lot to be uncertain about. Anytime. I think Tom Hanks's video went around the internet for a while of this too shall pass. It applies equally to the good things as much as the bad things. So if this too shall pass, whatever this is, what comes next? And how and where can I control what comes next? That's futurists, right? No disrespect to the futurists out there, but you're basically looking at there are alternate realities that could manifest themselves, alternate paths based on different choices, based on different outcomes to those choices. If one of those paths seems more desirable to me and there's something I can control, then that seems like a really good thing to me.
So I was looking at my present retreat. Okay. So I'm thinking about muscle memory and I'm like, I do this thing every week. Does this actually help with downside planning? And it turns out, okay, so I'm going to go back to my example. I'm listening to you, Christine. I'm like, ooh. So I'm going back to the example I shared and I'm like, ooh, I've actually been working on really big initiatives around this part of my business for over a year. 5+ quarters. This has been not only the top priority, but the most impactful priority to the future and longevity of Red Direction. I'd say go back and take a look at whatever you're doing. In my case, it's a present retreat. The clues are there. The clues are there. And you can actually go, ooh, maybe I'm not putting enough time, or how come this is the time that I'm spending in here? And that's actually because so that's in that quarterly piece, but then even in the weekly piece, I'm looking at what are the state of things? Give me the neutral data so I can go, cool, it's here. So how do I want to interpret that? Does that help us move the needle toward or away from our goals? And then being able to adjust decisions or communications or priorities based off of that, and making sure that those changes don't take our eyes off of where we want to be in 5 years. And that's it's an interesting, cool way to bring it back, and where that executive time, in my world, it's a present retreat, becomes really powerful because success does leave clues. And the landmines have already been planted if we choose to find some of them. And we can actually help ourselves by taking a look at what are we doing and how are we documenting this and what do we see and what is being reported in the teams and what are the repeated things that we're not listening to as closely as we might. So are there trends yet, right? All of those things can come from just stopping and taking executive time, a present retreat for yourself. So that's like my big takeaway. I actually would say then part of a present retreat could be, what are your go-to questions? If I'm doing my worst case planning scenario or understanding what the potential of an outcome could be for something, what are the questions I need to ask every single time to ensure I'm evaluating every single scenario the same way?
If success leaves clues, and I would argue it does, looking back at the things that have lingered on your to-do list, the things you perpetually avoided, the appointments you repeatedly put off, the conversations you can repeatedly put off, there is something there, right? And it may be that you evaluate it's no longer relevant, it's no longer important, I was right to not give it time and energy. It might also signal where you are trepidatious about looking and what you are nervous about actually thinking through. And that's a great opportunity if you're like, I think I need to talk to somebody, but I don't know who and I don't know about what. It's probably about that thing that makes you feel a certain way. And that's a great time to call in somebody you know and trust and feel like you could be more vulnerable with and say, listen, I really need your help. And it's okay. I've had people say, I'm embarrassed. I'm like, that's not because I'm embarrassed for you. I'm glad you're here. But if you're embarrassed that you made this choice or you didn't call me sooner or why is it taking so long to address that? Feel that feel. Don't let it stop you. But feel the fear and do it anyway. What did you say? Dread and do?
Dread then do.
Dread then do, right? All the versions of feel the feel, but don't let it stop you from doing the thing that you know is going to help you feel better, do better, be better moving forward.
Bernadette, this is the answer to your question that you left us in the conversation before the show. Keep moving forward without over-analyzing.
And just remember, if the only place the conversation takes place is in your head, you don't have enough information. Because Q said, your ability to be well-positioned, whether it's a negotiation or a planning process, is to have more information. And you have a finite amount of information in your skull. And so I'm a perpetual too much in my head person. Recognize that and make a different choice of how am I going to stop? Whether it's a timer, calling a friend, interrupting yourself. The interruption of behaviors is probably the biggest thing.
So what's your biggest takeaway today?
I'll call out the phrases that I want to hopefully stick in people's heads, right? Success leaves clues. Wrote that one down right away. That's fantastic, Jess. Finding someone Christy said this one, finding someone who's not an expert nor a novice at what you're doing to help you through these problems, someone that's in the middle, I think is a super valuable lesson there. And I think just knowing who you are, again, I would say and always not just doing things because it's the way you've always done them, right? At the end of the day, like this is about planning and thinking through new ways that things could happen and make sure you're solving the right problem. So many. I got a long list today of notes that I took.
I like that. How about you, Christy?
We are often the thing that is creating the greatest vulnerability in our business, and recognizing that, and whether it's because of the role we've played and the things we won't let other people do, or our unwillingness to look at scenarios, that's a big thing. Is there's a lot of identity stuff wrapped up in being a business owner, and all of us want to help businesses grow, right? We lead with our growth work. And so much of that is about how much the owner is willing to grow. So I would dare to say that we are all looking, if you asked us who our ideal client was, it's somebody who's already experienced a good amount of success and failure, who's seen both sides of the coin, who is very driven to do the best by their business, by their family, by their community, and who is willing to say, I need help. And I'm not even sure what that help is sometimes, but I know that I will be better if I work with someone as opposed to try and do this on my own. And that to me, once, I don't care what the business is, I don't care what the financials look like, if we can start with that type of orientation, then we can dive in, we can understand how the business works, we can understand what's working and not working, and we can make some choices that actually drive growth in a way that's sustainable and profitable. So like, if you aspire to be like a great business owner, I would say be coachable and seek out that counsel.
Yeah, fantastic.
My takeaway today is that this is really a bold conversation to be having. All of the things that we are talking about take courage. They take a willingness to recognize we don't know everything, that we might be doing some things unwell, we might not be doing other things at all, and to embrace the fact that we don't know what we don't know. And maybe we don't need to know, but maybe we do. And that's why this conversation is bold. And so that's what I'm going to leave as my biggest takeaway is whatever part of the conversation resonated with you today, it's bold. And whatever piece you want to take away and go, the next time I'm writing down our goals or I'm checking in with whatever I need to check in to respond to something or evaluate an opportunity, bring part of this conversation with you and be bold, because it'll be something you have never done before. And this is the conversation that we're having today. How do we do something that we've never done and do it better so that we can work from muscle memory? Because I really do think the muscle memory is what's going to carry us through. Oh, even if everything's going crazy, I'm going to get up and I'm going to brush my teeth because it's something I can control. I'm going to put clothes on because it's something I can control. Maybe I'll remember to eat breakfast, or somebody will tell me to, because even though that's in my control, I might forget, right? Set yourself up to be able to do the work and then go get the work done. Okay, that's another It's Your Business. Glad you were here. Glad you're listening. See you next time.
Every single time I have a conversation, I take away something that I want to share with 25 people. I know when you're listening to this podcast, you're also listening for that and will have something that you want to share. In the comments, I would like for you to engage with us. What is that thing that you want to tell 25 people from this program? Here's why it's important. It's important because, yeah, there are going to be how-tos. Yes, there are going to be steps. Yes, you're going to be like, oh, I wish I wrote that down. I wish I wasn't doing this and I could actually take action on that right now. But guess what? You're not. So engage right now, because that one thing you want to share with others will be the thing that you can figure out how to incorporate in your business, in your workflow, in your style tomorrow.
Wow! Jess hosts the Bold Business Podcast to provide insights for building a resilient, profitable business by deeply understanding your growth strategy, ensuring market relevance and your company's future. It is bold to deeply understand your growth strategy with your host, Jess Dewell. Get more information about how to drive solutions and reset your growth mindset at reddirection.com. Thank you for joining us, and special thanks to our post-production team at The Scott Treatment.